Hello. So this semester, fall of 2025, after I put in my book orders for my English 15 Rhetoric and Composition class, the first year writing class here at Penn State, I received an email from the bookstore telling me that The Structure of Argument by Annette Rottenberg and Donna Winchell was no longer the current edition, right? So I have used the 10th edition for several years now. That's no longer the current edition. So I had to make a decision. The bookstore basically gave me two options. One was that I could update my textbook to the most current edition, the 11th edition, which looks like this, or I could stick with the 10th edition, and they would not be able to guarantee that they could supply enough physical textbooks for everybody in the two sections of the class that I'm teaching. I opted to stick with the 10th edition because the 11th edition literally just came out in 2025. This is not a difficult edition to find. And realistically, many students don't get their textbooks from the university bookstore anyway. So it doesn't make that much of a difference. But what I actually want to talk about in this video is not that sort of individual arbitrary experience of assigning a book that is now outdated. What I wanted to talk about is the difference between these two editions. So the 10th edition came out, I want to say in 2021. The 11th edition came out this year, 2025. I've had a squint at the 11th edition. I just received it in the mail the other day. Because the next time I teach 15, I will use the most up-to-date edition. From what I can tell, the text, at least the overwhelming majority of the text written by Rottenberg and Winchell, is precisely the same. And I say that not to sort of single out Rottenberg and Winchell. I think this is just the way that things go, right? This type of book, textbooks, generally speaking, unless new information has really come to light, unless there have been big changes, a lot of the content doesn't shift. And especially for classes like first-year writing classes, business writing classes, things like this, there aren't necessarily big shifts, right? Rhetoric is reasonably well established as a field at this point. The big thing that does shift is new technology. And so some of the sections of textbooks, of rhetoric textbooks and things that deal with issues like communicating through multimedia, these things may be updated. But the sections on, say, writing a thesis or on the classical appeals of ethos, pathos, and logos are pretty much, if not exactly, the same because the information doesn't change, right? And so you might ask, quite reasonably, why release a new edition? And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. That as instructors and even as students, I do think it's sort of beneficial to understand why the publishing industry, the textbook publishing industry, does things the way that they do. And I don't have massive insight into this. I'm not a textbook publisher myself, either on the industrial side or on the side of being an author. But the main thing on a content level that changes between the two editions is the readings included. Right. So one of the things that is perpetually difficult for instructors is keeping up with what the kids these days are saying, right? Or the cultural references that our students will understand. I don't know if it's still going, because I actually haven't seen this circulated in a while, but I suspect that Beloit is still doing their mindset list every year, which is, it was a list, and again, possibly still is, a list in which the authors compiled sets of basic cultural knowledge that 18 to 22-year-olds, your average undergrad age, would have, and sort of exclude, and the kinds of things that older people, instructors, would know, but they would not, right? So like a Simpsons reference may go over the heads of students today because The Simpsons doesn't have the same cultural cachet that it had in, say, the 90s or the early 2000s, right? Whereas there's a lot of things that the young people enjoy that people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s just may not be aware of. So this is one of the things. And the same thing applies. Like, we as instructors have to try and navigate that. Like, do I update my pop culture references? Do I just stick with the pop culture references that I know because I know them, even if they're not helpful to students? Whatever it is. Textbooks do the same kind of thing, right? So the types of issues that are of current concern shift over time, right? This is pretty easy to recognize, right? And so an article or an essay or whatever it is that was published in the 2021 edition, which would have probably been compiled even pre-COVID, right? There's probably these reading selections were probably chosen 2019 and 2020 for the most part, and then it goes to print in 2021. And so the reading selections here refer to a world of 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And while for some of us that is not going to feel like a massively long time ago, when you're 18, 6 years ago, you were 12. I mean, a 12-year-old experiences the world in a completely different way than an 18-year-old, right? And so, and 12-year-olds are likely not to be that attuned to major political and cultural debates necessarily. I mean, I may be underestimating the news savvy of the average 12-year-old, but I feel like when I was 12, world events was not my primary focus. And so when you go from one edition to another edition, you update a lot of the readings, right? So, and that's a good thing in many ways. Things become less culturally relevant and new things become culturally relevant. There's a lot of readings in this new 11th edition that are about the impact of the COVID pandemic on society. And the book that was released in 2021 just doesn't have those. But of course, for students going to university in 2025, COVID was a major event in their lives. And so that will be something that they can connect with, right? Whereas some of the more sort of granular debates, like I think, let's see. Trying to quickly and easily find one that I remember is not in the more updated version. So this one I don't. This one I don't know was taken out because of changing sensibilities or changing concerns about it, but I did notice this one is gone. So the 11th edition does not have an essay called "Are Sports Fans Happier?" And actually, I noticed that one primarily because that's an essay my students often write rhetorical evaluations of. But I think in this edition, and I couldn't find it in the table of contents, and I don't want to waste that much more time on it. I think there's a speech by Hillary Clinton that is not in this edition, which probably makes sense because, I mean, after the 2020 election, or really after the 2016 election when she lost to Trump, Hillary Clinton has mostly sort of faded from mainstream politics, as far as I can tell. Like, she's still around, she still does stuff, but she's nowhere near as central as she was pre-2017, right? So, I mean, that's the sort of substantive change that occurs. But then the other thing, of course, is a new edition is profitable for publishers and possibly for textbook authors as well. Like, I don't have a good sense of this. Like, I know that academic books don't make money, right? I've never seen a royalty check from my book. People who I know of who have seen royalty checks from their academic books, they tend to be very, very low. Like, if you get $10, you've done well off that book. But textbooks have a much wider distribution and they have a much, much higher price tag. So I suspect authors of textbooks maybe make a little bit more. But when you release a new edition and you expect people to update, that means new sales, right? Because there's a ton of used copies of this floating around, right? If I'm Macmillan, the publisher of this textbook, and I know that there's 1,000 copies of this on Amazon, that's 1,000 textbooks I'm not selling. Whereas if I release this new edition and there's no used copies on Amazon because it's brand new, guess who you have to buy from? Macmillan. So Macmillan makes more profit. And again, Rottenberg and Winchell hopefully make profit from that too. So that was my sort of basic assumption. And I think that's still fundamentally true. They make money on this by essentially eliminating the used textbook market for that particular title. But here's something that struck me as really, really interesting. So I actually went on the website for Macmillan, and I looked at the prices for the 11th edition and the 10th edition. So the 10th edition, a lot of their stuff online has just been removed because they don't really want people to go for it. But the ebook version for the Structure of Argument 10th edition is still available through the website. And you can rent it for 6 months for $39.99 or buy it for $49.99. Now, this is the thing that actually really surprised me. The 11th edition ebook, you can rent for $39.99 or buy for $49.99. Those prices look strikingly similar, right? They are exactly the same price, whether you buy the old outdated version of the textbook or the new up-to-date version. And that strikes me as very, very weird because, again, if a new edition is partially about increasing corporate profit for the publisher, then it does seem like the new version should be more expensive. Now, the other thing that I noticed, you can rent the paperback version of this book. The paperback version of the 10th edition is no longer available, but paperback version of the 11th edition. Now, remember, if you rent the ebook, the digital version, $39.99 for 6 months. If you rent the paperback for 3 months or 4 months, it's actually cheaper. $34.99 versus and $37.99. Obviously, you get less time with it, right? So, I mean, by renting a paperback copy, you save $5, but you only get it for half the time, 3 months rather than a digital edition for 6 months. Or you save $2 and you get 4 months rather than 6, right? To rent the paperback for 6 months is $41.99, so $2 more. And then to buy the book, $83.99, or wholesale $67.27. But what I find really striking about that is the cost of delivering an ebook is going to be much lower, I would have to imagine, than the cost of delivering and then recollecting a paperback. Right? So they have to ship this to you and then get you to ship this back at the end of your rental period. That's got to take more labor, more costs, etc., than having what I am absolutely sure is an automated system just sort of open access to that textbook for you and then close access at the end of your rental period. Like, I kind of don't imagine there are really any significant costs to that at all. So the $40 cost to them, that's probably pretty close to pure profit at this stage. Whereas with mailing a textbook out and then needing to recollect it, that's probably less profitable. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? I'm not demonizing Macmillan here. I think they're a relatively good publishing company, but they are a publishing company in the US that functions on an economy of profit for textbooks, right? And so I think this is a thing that, again, sort of, it's worth being aware of the dynamics of all of this stuff. Like, how does the textbook publishing market work? And this has definitely not been a comprehensive discussion of that. I'm not in a position to give a comprehensive discussion. Why do they come out with new editions? What kinds of things typically change in new editions, et cetera, et cetera? That's all worth being aware of, especially if you teach over an extended period of time and you use the same textbook repeatedly, right? You will eventually run into a situation where the edition you are currently using will become outdated and you have to update. You have to shift to the new one, which, I mean, isn't the biggest problem in the world, especially if much of the information in the text remains the same. But it does mean you have to replan some things, right? Because the page numbers in this don't exactly line up with the page numbers in this. And some of the readings that I would assign out of this are not in here. There's new ones in here that I will assign next time I teach the course, et cetera, et cetera. So this is all stuff that you want to be aware of. And from a student's perspective, I don't think it makes a massive difference what goes into an update for a textbook, but it's probably generally useful information to know what's going on with different editions and why your instructor may specify which edition you need.